I've got the woe begone, down low, Mifwump Blues. But grandfather's garden is the cure for the Mifwump Blues.
Hello again. This is Riane Eisler. I'm the president, as many of you know, of the Center for Partnership Studies, and I'm here again to quickly introduce our wonderful Brie Mathers, who will be reading to you the second story from Grandfather's Garden by David Loye. And I want to tell you two things. One, I will not be with you for most of the rest of this series. I'll be here in spirit, though, even though I won't be on camera. And two, I want to, in this session, give a special shout out of thanks, not only to Brie, but to the wonderful illustrator of Grandfather's Garden, A. Christopher Simon, a man who, as you can read in the book, has been an illustrator for so many classics, starting with with Dickens, and going forward from there. And Chris, you just managed somehow to really, really express the wonderful whimsy of these stories. So thank you so much. And here again is Brie.
Thank you, Riane. My name is Brie. As you'll know, we did a story together last week. I am the creative director for the Girls Resiliency Education Fund. That is a project of the Center for Partnership Studies. And I'm so excited to be wearing this different hat in this series and bringing you the wonderful stories from the wonderful Grandfather's Garden. I want to welcome all the children back. And I hope you brought your markers and your pencil crayons and your crayons, and that you will let your imaginations run wild, because we have yet another story for you. And I think you're really going to love this one. It is called The Clam That Made a Pearl. And Riane just introduced our wonderful illustrator, A. Christopher Simon. I want to show you a close-up of his opening illustration, which is just so wonderful, of a clam and a sea urchin in love. This is the story of the clam of Am. It comes from an old Indian legend from the Onega tribe, and it was told originally 500 years ago by a chieftainess of the Onega tribe to her grandchildren. This is the story of Ham, the clam. Ham was a happy clam and just going about his business at the bottom of the ocean. Everything was going along just fine until he fell in love. The way it happened was that he was in his clam bed and there were all these girl clams around him, but they just didn't interest him. He just thought, there's something about clams that's uninteresting. They're sort of mud brown and lying around here in the mud, and I just don't go for that. Then one day he saw this gorgeous sea urchin, and then he fell in love just bango, like that, instantly. So he worked up his nerve, and the next time she went by, he said, "Pardon me, what's your name?" And she says, "My name is Shalili Sea Urchin." He thought that was the most lovely name he had ever heard. And he said, "That is the most lovely name I've ever heard." She felt very complimented, and well, to make a long story short, they fell in love, just bango, just instantly. And they saw no reason to futz around and Within about 5 minutes, they decided they'd go to her parents and he'd ask for her hand in marriage. So they went to her parents, and the parents were, well, how should I say it? They didn't want to appear prejudiced. So when Shillelagh said to them, "This is my new intended Ham the Clam," Mrs. Sea Urchin said, "Pleased to meet you." But within herself, she thought, "A clam? A clam for a son-in-law? No way, Jose." Mrs. Sea Urchin's plot. She knew that her daughter, Shillelagh, had an enormously strong will, and that unless she could come up with something that would stop this marriage, Shillelagh would prevail in the long run, particularly because her father was such a disappointment. He had the strange name of Mordred, which didn't fit him at all, as he was a rather harmless-looking sea urchin. He was a very quiet man who never said anything but "Yep" or "Nope." So she said, "My dear, your father and I really must give this a little thought overnight." And Shillelagh said, "Well, all right, Mom, but I want your answer tomorrow." That really put the pressure on. So that night, Mrs. Sea Urchin said to Mordred, "We've got to do something." She talked at great length, and she said, "Are you listening to me?" And he said, "Yep." And she said, "You're sure you're listening to me?" And he said, "Yep." And she said, "You're sure you're not thinking about something else?" And he said, "Nope." And she said, "What did I say?" And he said, "Well, my dear, you outlined a truly fiendish scheme. As I recall, you said you were going to invite your sister Gertrude over tomorrow and get Gertrude to put an obstacle, an insurmountable obstacle, before this marriage." She said, "That's very good, Mordred." And that is exactly what she did. Aunt Gertrude to the rescue. So the next day, when Ham the Clam came back to get the answer to whether he could have the hand of Shillelagh Sea Urchin in marriage, there was Aunt Gertrude, all primed. And she asked Ham the Clam, "Do you have anything special you can do? Because it really will take a special person to marry my niece." Ham the Clam said, "There's nothing special about me except for my love for Shillelagh." Shillelagh beamed at this. Then Aunt Gertrude sprung her trap. She said, "As you know, Shillelagh, I have been to the big city, and there I saw in the window of a jewelry store an oyster shell, actually the 2 shells of an oyster that had produced a gorgeous pearl. I feel that my niece must marry a bivalve that can produce a pearl, a gorgeous pearl, as gorgeous as the pearl in that jewelry store." Of course, immediately, Mrs. Sea Urchin said, "Oh, that is such a wonderful idea, Gertrude." She nudged Mordred, and he said, "Yup." Well, it was 3 against 1. Ham, I'm leaving out of the equation because this was going by too fast for him. Shillelagh knew something was up, but it was 3 against 1. She was about to protest when Aunt Gertrude pulled the ace from her sleeve. She said, "You look like a young man of resolve. I think if you put your mind to it, you could produce a pearl, and then I could bless your taking the hand of my niece in marriage." So Ham said, "Well, I'll try." Ham's first labor of love. So he went off and he asked advice from a very old clam. He said, "Have you ever heard of us clams producing pearls like oysters do?" The old clam said, "I heard of such a thing. Maybe 30 generations back, there's this legend of Sam the Clam who produced a pearl, but no one has done it since that I know of." And Ham said, "Well, how do oysters go about it?" The old clam said, Well, the legend says that they get a grain of sand inside their shell. It starts to rub around in there and it turns into a pearl. It just sort of scratches the pearl stuff off of the inside of the shell, and it sticks to the grain of sand and builds up this way and becomes a pearl over time. So Ham went to work at it. He swallowed some sand, and it made it awfully uncomfortable sleeping with this grain of sand scraping up against his spine. But anything for love. So he worked and he worked and he worked and he produced a pumpkin. It was a miracle. He was so overjoyed. He rushed back to Shillelagh sea urchin's house and he said, "Look, I've produced a pumpkin." Now this sort of threw them for a loop, and they realized they needed a little time to think about it. Mrs. Sea Urchin chopped up the pumpkin and made it into pumpkin pie. And they had all the neighbors in, and everybody said it was the best pumpkin pie they had ever had. Ham became very popular, but they still didn't want a clam for a son-in-law. Ham's second labor of love. So Aunt Gertrude was called back in to do the dirty work. She prepared her sweetest smile and called the young couple together, and she said, "I'm awfully sorry to tell you this. We're very impressed with the pumpkin, but, well, it's not a pearl." She thought that would end it right there, but Ham said, "I'll try again." So he went back and got another grain of sand and had to put up with it scraping against his spine at night, and it was awfully uncomfortable, and it took so long. But this time he produced a basketball. "Oh," he thought, "it's another miracle." So he went back to Shillelagh sea urchin's house and said, look what I produced, a basketball." Well, this was astonishing, but also very disconcerting to Mrs. Sea Urchin. She still didn't want a clam for a son-in-law. But this called for some time to think it over. They took the basketball out in the driveway where they had a basketball hoop on a thing over the garage door. They tried it out, and all the neighbor kids came over and tried it out, and everybody agreed it was the best basketball they had ever seen. To top it off, it had the signatures of all the Harlem Globetrotters on this basketball. There was a big write-up in the papers. The television stations came. Ham was really a pretty big thing. He even got on the cover of Time magazine. But still, you know, he was a clam, and they did not want a clam for a son-in-law. Ham's third labor of love. So once again, Aunt Gertrude was elected to do the job. She called the young couple together and said, "Now we're very impressed with your latest accomplishment, Ham. Truly we are, but it's still not a pearl. It's just not good enough." She thought that would end it, but Ham said, "I'll try again." So he went back, and he and Shillelagh so much wanted to get married. It was so awful for them to be kept apart. Ham had put all his energy into these tasks. So he went back and ate another grain of sand and put up with it scraping against his back at night. Months went by. Lo and behold, he produced an electric light bulb. He rushed back to Shillelagh sea urchin's house and said, look at what I've produced." They were really thrown for a loss now. We will need a little time to think this through, they figured, so they plugged the thing in and had to admit it was wonderful to have light at night, because it was real spooky down at the bottom of the ocean at night when it got so black and you couldn't see anything. It was so nice to have this light bulb. All the neighbors flocked around and said, "Oh, this is such a wonderful thing." The neighbors all sat out on the lawn and said, "Look at all the strange sea creatures that you can see at night with this light bulb." They had no idea of the wonders of the universe. they were living in, because there were all these things that came out only at night, but now at last they could see because of Ham's light bulb. This time, he not only made it to the cover of Time magazine, but it was on CNN worldwide. They took pictures of all the things you could see at night with Ham's light bulb, but still they didn't want a clam for a son-in-law. Father Sea Urchin, Mordred by name, you will recall, would have accepted him, but the mother sat on him and shut him up. She said, "Do you understand why we can't have him?" And the father said, "Yup." She said, "You're not going to go wishy-washy on us, are you?" And he said, "Nope." And she said, "You'll stick with the family on this, won't you?" And he said, "Yup." She said, "There'll be none of this male bonding stuff, will there?" He said, "Nope." So she figured that was all set. And so again, Aunt Gertrude was elected to do the job. So she called the young couple in and said, "We're very impressed. The press attention is nice. It's been nice to stop and see all the sea creatures and so on, but we're very sorry. It's not a pearl." Ham succeeds. Once again, she thought that would end it. But Ham said, "Well, I'll try again." So he went and ate another grain of sand, put up with it scraping against his spine at night for months. And lo and behold, he produced a pearl. It was the stuff of which myths and legends would be made. His story would go into clam history through all eternity. Sam the clam, now Ham the clam, workers of miracles. He rushed back to Shillelagh Sea Urchin's house and said, look, I've done it. It's a pearl." Mrs. Sea Urchin didn't know what to make of it because she had never seen a pearl. Aunt Gertrude was gone, so she said to Ham and Shillelagh, "Well, we're going to have to call Gertie to get her back here because she's the only one that's seen a pearl. It could be anything for all I know. We'll consider it then." So the young couple were just on tenterhooks, just pins and needles, waiting for the arrival of Aunt Gertrude. The next day, Aunt Gertrude arrived. She took one look at that pearl that Ham had worked so many months to produce. After all these tasks, she took a look at that pearl that was one of the most magnificent accomplishments of the clams of all the ages. Only one other clam in all known clam history had achieved this. And she said, "That's not a pearl." She said, "That's a squudgy, ugly, gray, misshapen, awful-looking thing. It's about as much like a pearl as a lump of coal is like a crystal ball." Ham just stood there, frozen to the pavement. And Shillelagh was speechless for a minute. And then she said, well, I really can't tell you what she said because it was pretty raw and raucous. She just let Aunt Gertrude have it. She said, "I've had it with you people. That pearl is good enough for me." And she swooped up Ham and they went off in a cloud of dust. Mrs. Sea Urchin and Aunt Gertrude just stood there blinking, dumbfounded. Mr. Sea Urchin did his best. He tried to look dumb and non-committal about the whole thing, but pretty unsuccessfully. And what happened to the pearl? Well, of course, they made it into a wedding ring, which Shillelagh wore and passed on to all their children through 500 generations. And there it stands to this day in the Sam and Ham Museum of Clam Wonders, which is located somewhere off the mouth of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico. At least this is what the old Indian legend claims. A moral for the story: follow your heart and don't give up. So please send us your drawings. And if you have a story that has a special moral in it, we would love to hear that story as well. And we're going to include the email that you can send that to right on the bottom of the screen. And we can't wait to see you next week. Bye.
I've got the woe begone, down low, Mifwump Blues. But grandfather's garden is the cure for the Mifwump Blues.